Hello, my name is Kerry Fager. I'm a digital marketer on the local team at FindLaw, and today I'm going to be talking to you about local SEO, or local search as we often call it. So just a little introduction about myself. I have been in digital marketing for about 4 years. I graduated from the University of Northwestern in 2010, but I've been doing local SEO specifically for the past 3 years. So I eat, sleep, and breathe local SEO. So today we're going to talk about what local search is, a little bit about how the local search ecosystem works, how businesses can optimize their presence for local, and just about some of the updates and what the future of local search looks like. So for purposes of today's discussion, it can be very helpful to think about local search as a subsegment of search in general. So when we say local search, what are we talking about? Well, local search is when a person is looking for a physical place. So in this example, I've done the search for restaurants near Minneapolis. If I perform this search, I'm looking for a place to eat in Minneapolis, right? So when we talk about optimizing for local search, we're talking about optimizing organic listings and local listings for searches about specific places. But generally, we're referring to optimizing for local listings. And for purposes of today's discussion, that's what we're going to be referencing. So in this example, restaurants near Minneapolis, you see that top black bar of search results. Those are called carousel results in a Google search. Those are local listings that show up on Google Maps. So each of those results corresponds to one of the pushpin markers on the map section just below to the bottom right. And then the highlighted green portion is, of course, organic search result listings. So Google is not obviously the only search engine, and Bing and Yahoo also have local search results, so I just wanted to show you what those results look like as well. This is a search in Bing for burgers near Atlanta. The highlighted green portion is organic listings. The highlighted red, of course, is the local listings. You'll notice it looks a little bit different than Google local results. It's in a pack result as opposed to a carousel, but it does have that map, same as Google. And then, of course, there's Yahoo Local. And when you perform Yahoo Local searches, eventually you're going to get directly to Yahoo Maps. So this is a search for gas station near Plano, Texas. So the highlighted blue portion happens to be paid ads, and then the highlighted red portion, of course, again, is local search results. So because Google is king, of course, when it comes to search engines, we're going to be focused primarily on Google today and how local relates to Google. So I just want to throw a couple stats at you. They're both about local search. The first one is about 1 in 3 queries that people just type into Google are about places. They're about finding information about locations. This is a quote from Ed Parsons, who's a Google employee. And although this statistic is slightly outdated, the figure is probably a little bit higher, but it's still very important for helping us understand just how important local search is. And the second statistic is about 80% of tablet and smartphone owners use their device to search locally, meaning they use those devices to search for places. So those are just 2 examples of why we can't ignore local search, and that's why we're talking about local search today. So I just wanted to show you 2 examples of what local search results looked like several years ago and what they look like today, just to compare the 2. So this is a search, I don't remember the exact year, but maybe the mid-2000s, about what a local search looked like in Google. This is for plumbing near Boulder, Colorado. And so you see the paid ads near the top in blue, the local listings, the pack results in red, and then there's an organic result there in green. Fast forward to the present day, this is what that exact same search looks like. Again, you see the paid ads and the organic listings, and then you see the local listings beneath that, and then of course the map that corresponds to each of the local listings. This local result looks a little bit different than that first result I showed, the search for restaurants near Minneapolis. This search does not show carousel results, but I don't want you to be thrown off by that. Sometimes Google just decides that the carousel results are more appropriate for what users are looking for, but sometimes local results just give what we call these pack results, where it shows the push pin markers corresponding with the map. So that's the difference between what local search results look like. Now, talking a little bit about how business owners can manage their presence on Google Maps, how they can manage their business listings. There have been a lot of changes ever since Google launched their first dashboard that allowed users to manage their local listings. So the first rendition of this dashboard was called Local Business Center. That launched in 2005. It was very rudimentary. It allowed business owners to only add very basic information about their businesses. So fast forward about 5 years to 2010, and Google launched the brand new Google Places dashboard. And this is really what business owners were waiting for. It allowed them to enhance their listings with a lot of information: business hours, business description, categories, payment info, offers, and a lot of other information. In 2011, Google launched their answer to Facebook, the Google Plus social media platform. And so this was only a year after Google Places, and most people in the local SEO industry realized that at some point Google was probably going to start integrating some of their social features into business listings that show up on Google Maps, because social media just seems to coincide very closely with local search. Local search is highly built upon reviews and recommendations, which we'll talk about a little later. And so social media just seems to interact with that very well. So sure enough, it only took a year after the launch of Google Plus for Google to start integrating business listings with their social media platform. So in 2012, Google launched what was called Google Plus Local. Unfortunately, the transition to Google Plus Local was not as clean as business owners and SEOs would have liked, and the transition ended up taking a couple years or so to finally finish. And there was actually a time when several business listings were in the Google Places dashboard at the same time as the Google Plus dashboard. So it was really just a big mess. Fortunately for business owners and SEOs, Google launched a brand new dashboard earlier this year called the Google My Business dashboard. And this time Google did a really good job with their launch. It was a very clean launch. Most business listings were transitioned within a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. And so the My Business dashboard is now a central location for where small business owners can manage their presence on Google across most all of Google's properties. AdWords, Express, obviously Google Plus, and Google listings on Google Maps can all be managed directly from the Google My Business dashboard. I did want to call out also that because Google has gone through so many branding changes themselves as it relates to how business owners can manage their listings on Google Maps, to not be thrown off if there have been changes. By the time you're watching this video, Google changes very quickly, and so there may have been slight changes by the time you're watching this since the time that this video was recorded. I do find it quite comical how Google, since 2005, has helped business owners market themselves on Google Maps, and yet Google is struggling to figure out how to market themselves and their service for business owners. So this is an example of a listing on Google Maps that is still on the old platform. There are still a few listings on Google Maps that are still in the old dashboard and have not yet fully transitioned over to the Google My Business dashboard. So what gives this listing away is that there is a map in the background. So most likely this is a listing that has not been claimed on Google Maps and is still in an old dashboard. This is what a listing looks like in the brand new My Places dashboard. It has all the social features, and then of course you can add information such as a business description and a cover photo similar to a cover photo of a Facebook page. So obviously we're talking primarily about Google today, but there are a lot of other business listings besides Google and Bing and Yahoo, of course, that factor into the local search ecosystem, and I want to talk about those for just a minute. Some of the more popular local business directories on the web are listed here, such as Yelp, Superpages, City Search, and there are hundreds and hundreds of other directories on the web that provide local search experience for users. Some of them are specific to certain industries, such as restaurants or business professionals, but there are also a lot of other directories that will list any business that chooses to use their service. What's important to note is that Google, in order to determine the ranking of listings in their search results, actually uses the information from some of these other business listing directories. And we'll talk a little bit more about ranking later, but I did want to call out in this screenshot example, this is a sushi business listed on Google, and they actually indicate a couple other business listing directories where users can click on to find more information about that business. So that's important to keep in mind, that Google basically scrapes all the rest of the web to find information about businesses, and it uses this information in their local listings. So you might be wondering, where do local listings come from in the first place? Obviously, business owners can add their information to these business listing directories as well as Google Maps. but sometimes businesses' information shows up on these directories before a business owner has even added it themselves. So where these directories get this information are called data aggregators, and there are 4 main data aggregators right now on the web that provide this information. They are Axiom, Localese, which is part of Neustar, Infogroup, and Factual. So I'm going to just read the definition of data aggregator from Moz.com because they explain what a data aggregator is so well. So where do the data aggregators get their info? These companies compile data about businesses from multiple online and offline sources, including phone bills, business registration records, Chamber of Commerce membership rosters, and many other sources. So obviously, these 4 data aggregators have access to information that none of the other business listings elsewhere on the web do. So other business listing directories rely on these aggregators quite a bit. So in order to get a visual of how data within the local ecosystem, as it's called, interacts with each other, I want to show you a diagram. And this is an infographic that was created by David Mim, who's one of the world's top experts as it relates to local SEO. And I'm excited that I get to use this as a teaching tool. I asked him for permission to use it, and he was okay with that. So this is the local search ecosystem that David Mim has created just to sort of visually represent the local search world. So as you can see, everything points back into Google Plus Local, and it probably should be called Google My Business now, but you can see the 4 data aggregators at some of the corners. So Infogroup is in the top left, Axiom is in the top middle, and Neustar Localese is in the top right, and then Factual is in the bottom right. So you can see the ecosystem is quite a complicated arena, and there's a lot of just a lot of information flowing all over the place. So it's because of this complex ecosystem that local SEO is really a difficult industry to work in, because it can be difficult to manage businesses' information across all these different properties. We'll give some tools in a different video about how some of that information can be managed. So let's talk a little bit about how the local algorithm works. How does a business, or how does Google determine how businesses show up in search results? The interesting thing about local search is that Google basically gives us the answers to the test. I mean, they don't lay out exactly how the algorithm works in detail, but they give us some very specific guidelines in how the algorithm works. And they have compiled everything into 3 primary factors about how the local algorithm works. And I'm going to talk about those 3 right now. The first one is relevance. It's pretty self-explanatory. Is a business listing relevant to what a user is searching for? If I am looking for a pizza restaurant in Menominee, Wisconsin, Google is probably not going to give me a search result for dentists. It's because business owners are able to categorize their business listings so that they specify exactly what they do so that users can find them, so that they're relevant to their searches. Second factor is distance. This is also very self-explanatory. Use the dentist example. If I am a dentist in Queens, New York, let's say a user is looking for a dentist in Brooklyn, New York, Google's probably not going to show me as a dentist in Queens to that user because there's probably quite a few dentists in Brooklyn that are much closer. So Google obviously uses distance as a factor in determining where search results show up for given users. And Google's very smart at figuring out where users are physically located when they're searching. Obviously, if they include a geographic term in their search, it makes it a lot easier for Google, but Google has a lot of factors to determine where people are physically located. And then the third and final factor is something called prominence. So Google uses offline and offline factors to determine how prominent a business is. So pictured on the left here is the Eiffel Tower, and pictured on the right is the James J. Hill House. This is a historical landmark in St. Paul. A lot of people around the world are very aware of the Eiffel Tower, but not many people know what the James J. Hill House is. A lot of people in Minnesota probably are aware of the James J. Hill House, but many more people know about the Eiffel Tower. So because of this, the Eiffel Tower is mentioned thousands and maybe even millions more times on the web than the James J. Hill House is. So Google uses that to decide that the Eiffel Tower is a much more prominent landmark than the James J. Hill House is. So let's just say, for example, that both landmarks are located in Paris. Obviously they're not, but there are actually business listings for these two landmarks on Google Maps. If you want, you can search and find business listings for these landmarks. But let's say they're both in Paris and all other factors being equal. If someone was searching for historic attraction in Paris, the Eiffel Tower is probably going to show up before the James J. Hill House because of all those mentions on the web, because it's much more prominent in the eyes of Google. I don't have time to go into how Google uses offline factors, unfortunately, but just know that even though Google is a search engine and they are primarily focused on what happens in the online world, they actually have ways of using offline prominence to determine how prominent a business is. So those are the three factors that Google lays out. But I would actually argue that there's a fourth factor that has become very, very important as it relates to where listings show up in search results. And so this is not something that Google has indicated, but this is something that just I believe and a lot of SEOs in the industry also believe, and that is personalization. So if you think back to 2012 when the Google Plus local dashboard launched, when Google Places merged with Google Plus, social media factors starting to come into play as it relates to local search. Whether or not you're signed into your Google Plus account factors into where listings show up in search results. I'll use a personal example just to highlight this. Back in 2013, I was looking for an animal hospital near St. Paul. So I did a search, Animal Hospital, St. Paul, Minnesota. I got a list of local search results. Now, when I did that search, I was not signed into my Google account or my Google Plus account. I decided to do the same search, this time sign into my Google Plus account. Now I have a lot of people in my Google Plus circles, which are basically like friends on Facebook. So I signed into my Google Plus account, I performed the exact same search. This time the search results look quite a bit different. And there was actually one result that showed up, I think it was number 3, that wasn't anywhere to be found on that first page of results in my first search. The reason it showed up was because my friend had rated that business 5 stars. So that's just an example of where Google used information about one of my friends because Google thought, hey, someone in your circle reviewed this business, you might be interested in that result a little bit more. So that's just one example of how personalization can factor into local search results, and it's going to become much more important in the near future. So if you want to learn more about how local listings rank in search results, I would recommend reading David Mim's Local Search Ranking Factors. It's a study that David Mim performs every year. He polls 35 or so of the world's top local search experts on what they think affects local search rankings. So if you were to look at the factors, all the list of what affects local search result rankings, it's basically a fanned out version of these 4 factors that I just went into detail into. I believe the last study outlined about 80 or so factors, but it's very, very helpful information, and anyone who's interested in local search and optimizing a business for local should definitely look into these local search ranking factors. So we've talked a little bit about how Google uses factors to rank business listings. So let's talk a little bit about what businesses can do to ensure they are as visible as possible on the web. Obviously, we've talked about how local search is when a user is looking for a physical place. So a business must, in order to optimize for local search, have a physical place that users can visit. So for example, an e-commerce site doesn't need a business listing on Google Maps. Think of Amazon. They have Amazon.com. They don't need a physical storefront that users can visit. So the most important thing involved in local search is an acronym, and it's called NAP. It stands for Name, Address, and Phone Number. A business must have a name, address, and phone number in order to optimize their presence on the web for local search. Now, anytime a name, address, or phone number is mentioned on the web, it's called a citation. An easy way to think of a citation is that it's almost like a backlink is for traditional SEO. So obviously backlinks are how Google finds a business's website on the web. Citations are how Google finds a business's name, address, and phone number on the web. So any mention of a name, address, or phone number anywhere on the web is a citation. A citation is similar to a backlink also in that you want more of them as a business in order to show up higher, but you also want quality citations, just like you want quality backlinks. So this is an example of a citation on an Internet Yellow Pages site. Obviously, you see the name, address, and phone number of the pizza restaurant. Another term that's oftentimes used for citations is linktation, and that's just a combination of the word backlink and citation, and that's just when a name, address, and phone number show up with a business's URL. So in this example, this would be a linktation. Most citation mentions are linktations on the web. Two other terms that are not important, but I'll just lay them out just because, are structured citations and unstructured citations. So a structured citation is when a name, address, and phone number shows up on a business listing directory that's for the purpose of providing users with business information. An unstructured citation is when a name, address, and phone number shows up anywhere else on the web. So for an example, on a blog post or in a blog comment. So most business listing directories, most structured citations that list an app will also list a URL to the website. So most of those are considered linktations. So the reason that citations are very, very important is that Google looks at citations to determine where listings show up on Google Maps in their ranking. So Google scrapes information from all over the web. And if they find information that's inconsistent with what they have on Google Maps, it can cause some confusion for Google. So Google is very, very smart, but they're not that smart. So in this example, we have a business listed here, J&G Dental, that's how they're listed on Google Maps. And Google scrapes Yelp for an example, and they compare that information with what they have on Google Maps. It's very, very similar, but it's slightly different. And so Google goes out to city search. They find information for the same business. It's very similar, but it's a little bit different. They do the same thing on other sites. And as you can see by this example, when the information is not exactly consistent, Google can get somewhat confused. Oftentimes, I think of my team who does local search as the managers of the name, address, and phone number for the clients that we manage. This might seem like a very simple job, but if you think about the local search ecosystem, you can see how complex of a job it really is. And NAP has to be consistent all the way down to the way street names are abbreviated and periods in a business name. For example, if Google were to find all these listings elsewhere on the web that I used in this example, Google might think that there are 5 different businesses located at this same address because they all have slightly different business names. So I just can't stress enough how important name, address, and phone number is. So moving away from NAP a little bit, we'll talk about reputation management. So I mentioned how social media obviously factors into local search quite a bit, but reviews are something that have always been existent in local search. So Google uses reviews on local listings to determine how prominent a local listing is. Obviously, if lots of people are talking about a business and are reviewing the business and giving them positive feedback online, it must be a pretty popular place. Another way to think about prominence is, what business is the most popular? So when SEOs found out that reviews affect where local listings show up in search results, they started to figure out ways that businesses can gather more reviews. Unfortunately, a lot of business owners and SEOs abuse this system, and so Google and a lot of the other business listing directories came up with ways to catch reviews that were falsified. They actually have very sophisticated filters on their platforms to determine whether or not a review is real or if it's fake. So some of the examples of filters that they have on their platforms are the velocity with which reviews show up on local listings. So for an example, if a listing only has 1 review on it, and then the next day all of a sudden it has 10 reviews, Google will probably consider most of those reviews not legit because it doesn't seem realistic that all of a sudden 9 more reviews showed up on a local listing. Another factor that they look at is how active the accounts that left the reviews are. So if a user created a Google account and they leave a review on a local listing, and then they don't do anything else with that account, they just leave it inactive, maybe they don't even sign into it, for the next 6 months, Google might remove that review that they left on the local listing because Google wants its users to be very active on Google. Another factor they look at is the content of the reviews. A lot of SEOs hypothesize that the content of the review could help impact where local listings show up in search results. So oftentimes when SEOs would try to falsify reviews, they would include lots of keywords because they thought that would help benefit search. Unfortunately, if a review contains a lot of spammy keyword text, it's probably going to remove. So, and the final example is that a lot of the business listing directories look at IP addresses. So at one point, a lot of businesses would place a tablet or a laptop or a computer within their storefront so that customers could leave reviews just after they purchase a product or use the service right there in the physical place of the business. Unfortunately, Google caught on to that, and they didn't like users leaving reviews all from the same place. They wanted the reviews to be much more organic. They wanted users to do it on their own. So if Google sees reviews all from the same IP address, they're probably going to remove them. So like I said, Google wants the reviews to be very organic. They want users to leave reviews of their own volition. So even though we do recommend that businesses try to get reviews, businesses should really bake acquiring reviews into their normal business process by asking users to go out and visit them on whatever business listing directory they use most frequently, whether it's Google or Yelp or Yahoo or any of the other listing directories, and let the user leave the review on their own accord. So oftentimes, users will leave negative reviews on businesses' listings on Google Maps and other platforms. And a lot of business owners do get upset about this, but fortunately, Google allows business owners to respond to negative reviews on their listings, and I highly recommend this. This shows other potential customers that the business owner is very personable, that they're willing to maybe make it up to past customers if their experience wasn't good. So I definitely recommend responding to negative reviews. I'll also say that having negative reviews is not always a bad thing. If I'm looking for a restaurant to eat at and I find a restaurant that has 50 positive reviews, let's say all of them are 5-star reviews, I might think that some of those reviews are not legitimate because I'd be surprised if any business has that many reviews and all of them are positive, unless they have really, really good food. So if there are some negative reviews listed on the business, it just shows that the reviewers are natural. I might want to see what's negative about the business, and that may not necessarily affect whether or not I visit the business or not, or whether or not I purchase the product. So negative reviews are not always a bad thing. So now let's talk about some of the algorithm updates that have happened in years past. There are updates constantly made to the local search algorithm, but I'm going to only focus on 2 major ones that affected local search. The first one is the Google Venice update. This happened in early 2012, and this made a lot of changes to the organic search algorithm. One of the most important changes that it made to the local search algorithm is that more localized organic results started to appear on broad queries in which no geographic modifiers were included. So let me translate that into English. If I were to do this search for haircuts before the Venice search, this actually is a screenshot of the search, what it looks like before the Venice update. Google only gives me organic search results. Now, Google knew that I may be looking for some haircut styles that were popular at the time when I did this search, but I also might be looking for a place to get a haircut. So Google recognized that for some of these searches, it wasn't showing search results, but people might be looking for a place without including a geographic term. So this is the exact same search for haircuts after the Venice update. No geographic term included, but now Google's giving me local search results. You see the pack results underneath the organic listings, and the map, of course, on the top right side that corresponds to the push pin markers. So that was the major thing that the Venice update did. The second update is the Hummingbird update, which happened last year. Google announced it late last year, and this affected local search quite a bit, but I'm going to focus on 2 things that it did for local search. One of them is that for searches similar to the example that I just showed with haircuts, Google started to show more localized organic results. So it would still show local listings, but it would show more organic search results within those searches, and they did not require geographic modifiers. The other big change that it did was it started to unblend some blended local search results. So blended search results are where Google uses organic information and local information and shows them within one search result, and sometimes Google authorship would also show in that search result. I won't go into detail about Google authorship right now, but basically what a blended search result would look like was it would use information from the website, it would have a push pin marker for the local listing, and if the website had implemented Google authorship, a photo with a byline might show up next to the search result. So a lot of the experts said that the Hummingbird update unblended the blend. I found some examples where it still did exist. Authorship obviously is not as big of a thing anymore because photos are no longer displayed in most search results. Google just announced that earlier this year, but the Hummingbird, just all you have to know is that the Hummingbird update might have unblended the blend. So let's move into talking about the guidelines for local business information on Google Maps. For a long time, the guidelines were called the Google Places Guidelines, but obviously Google Places is no more, so now they're called the Local Business Information Quality Guidelines. And this is really the textbook as to how businesses should list their information on Google Maps. And a lot of what's on the guidelines is very self-explanatory and common sense information. It says things like, list your name on Google Maps as it appears in the offline world. List your phone number as it appears in the offline world. Very simple things like that. But you'd be surprised how many business owners don't follow the guidelines. And Google's gotten really good at catching businesses that don't follow the guidelines, businesses that are trying to spam out their listings so that they show higher in search results, but Google's gotten very good at tracking those down. So just a summary of what the business guidelines are is that business owners should say who they really are. I just wanted to touch on those though because those are the rules of the local search arena that every business should follow. So if any business wants to optimize their presence on Google Maps, I definitely recommend reading those. So just as we've talked about local SEO, I just wanted to compare it to traditional SEO, and hopefully this visual might give you a better understanding and help to cement some of the things that we've talked about today. So if we think about local SEO, we've talked about how a business appears all over the web, on local business directories, on Google Maps, on the data aggregators, and things like that. And so you can think of local SEO as being primarily concerned with what is off the site of a business's website. And if you think about traditional SEO is more concerned with what is on the site. Everything points back to the website, backlinks, and things like that. Obviously, there are a lot of off-site factors that factor into traditional SEO, but if you think about how local SEO is concerned with what's off the site, traditional SEO is what's concerned with what's on the site. So what does the future of local search look like? Similar to traditional search, local search is always changing, and I don't expect it to stop changing anytime. For all we know, Google will release yet another dashboard for business owners to manage their presence on Google Maps within the next couple of years. So I expect it to change quite a bit. What changes more often than not as it relates to local search on Google is the cosmetics of the way local listings look on Google Maps. So the functionality and the ranking factors have been very consistent over the past few years, but the way local listings look and the way that business owners can interact with other users is changing quite constantly on Google Maps. If you want to learn more about local search, this is a list of the world's top experts in local search. The top 3 are definitely the ones that I recommend following. Mike Blumenthal, he's known as Professor Maps. He is the end-all be-all as it relates to business listings on Google Maps. David Mim, obviously I mentioned his name. He is a very smart guy. And then Linda Bouquet is also another important person in the local search arena. She actually runs her own forum where users all over the world and SEOs can learn more about local search and talk about some of the updates that have happened. So I recommend following all of these experts really. So thanks for listening to the presentation today. I hope you learned a lot more about local search as a result.